Om Namah Shivaya. Hi, Swami Sankarananda here. I think this is take number 6. Let's see how it goes. I'm so happy to be with you. Although I must admit, it would be very cool to be with you in person. And perhaps that can happen again soon. Let's see, God willing. I'm in Prema. Prema is the Yoga for Peace RV. And I've met several of you while they're in Michigan, in Prema or with Prema. We've driven there together the last few years. And I've been able, through grace, to participate in YogaFest the last few years. And very happy to join you in this way this year. So what we're discussing is Raja Yoga, which is called royal path, really meaning the path of control of the mind, meaning certainly in no negative way, but meaning to give our life back. The topic is how to make the mind our friend instead of our master. So it's introduction to Raja Yoga. We'll use the Sutras of Patanjali, called Raja Yoga Sutras variously, or Patanjali Yoga Sutras, or the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And I have right here, I'll show you this copy, and I'll take a moment and let you see. There are many, many translations, of course, of this particular Shastra. This one that I just held up is Swami Satchidananda, who is a disciple of Swami Shivananda's and the founder of Integral Yoga here in the West, and a great yogi, a great Hatha Yogan, and a great master of yoga. Yoga, of course, means union. Union with one's highest self. There's a term that we don't use very often, and the term is Boga, and some of us know the term, kind of like bogus. In English, transliteration typically spelled B-H-O-G-A. You can look it up on Google. There won't be nearly as many pages on the Google search results as on yoga, and that's very interesting because, in truth, most of us live in the state of Boga. And all of us, having taken birth here, have come into the world in the state of Boga. There are two types of union. There is union with the sense objects, and there is union with the highest. And what we're accustomed to is union with the sense objects, which is of the nature of suffering. And this is said in all of the traditions, that we keep uniting ourselves with the ephemeral, with the constantly changing, with the transient, with the images, with the pictures, the moving picture show, instead of uniting ourselves with the absolute, with that which is in the cave of the heart. And our situation here is profoundly simple, but very difficult to discern until we turn within. And the simple situation is that we've come here with a purpose, and the purpose is freedom or happiness. Everyone here is seeking happiness. It's true with all of the human beings. It's true with all of the animals. It's true with the plants. It's true with everyone here. Seeking happiness, and not the temporal happiness, not the happiness just for a moment, but the happiness that lasts, like the fairy tale, being happy ever after. It's said that it's your own true nature, that it's who we really are, and that we've been seeking this happiness, which is our own abode, our own true nature, in the constantly shifting, constantly changing show, and as a result have not been able to find it. We get it for moments. I remember when I began the study of yoga, something that resonated so deeply I'd had the experience, as all of us do, of pursuing my goals, going after the things and experiences that I desired, with varying degrees of success. Often successful, often not successful. And what I discovered was that nothing was ever really satisfying, not for long. I would get a new car that I desired, or a new friendship that I wanted to make, or some money, or any of these things that don't last. And I would feel happy when it was attained to. And then sometime after, the dissatisfaction would emerge again. Sometimes it would take a day. Sometimes it would take a minute or two. Can you relate? And life was vexing. There was a point where I came to the realization that I don't know anything, that I actually don't know anything. It's the best place in the world to be, to accept that we don't know anything. What I realized is all I wanted was to be happy, and I didn't know how to be. And that following the desires always resulted in continued unhappiness. Whether I got what I wanted or I didn't get what I want, the happiness was momentary. This much I discovered. So I came to see that I didn't know. And then in yoga theory, what we hear, yoga psychology, what we hear is that these experiences of happiness that we have that last for a moment are truly experiences of our own nature. Not happiness as a result of attaining to the thing that we wanted, or having the person that we wanted as our partner or our friend, or being isolated from the place that we've believed is causing us to suffer. This is an attainment as well. That, in fact, that happiness that comes for a moment, a day, a minute, is not coming from the thing, it's our own true nature. And that what's happened is that because we had been striving to attain and then attained whatever was the goal, upon the attainment, the mind went quiet. And the quiet mind allowed us to experience ourselves, our own true nature. And this resonated so deeply. In fact, studying my life to that point, it was all that could make sense. And so yoga is it's not about gaining something. It's not. And of course, yes, it helps physically, it helps mentally, it helps in so many ways, the practices of yoga. But we're told the purpose of yoga is not just that the purpose of yoga is to be free. It's absolute freedom in one's own self, to know oneself, to realize oneself, to abide in oneself, and therefore to be free. The Buddha was asked, after he'd meditated for 6 years, oh my God, what strength, what commitment, what commitment. Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine? All of us have heard something of the story of the Buddha. He knew that there was a truth that was evading him. He knew it. He knew that everything in this plane was temporal, that it was fleeting, that it only lasted for a moment, and therefore wasn't actually real, not truly real, relative to some deeper truth. And he knew that it was possible to know the deeper truth. And he committed himself. He said, I'm going to sit under this tree. I'm going to stay in silence, in contemplation, for as long as it takes in order to know the truth. And as long as it takes was 6 years. Oh my God. 6 years. And it came. He wasn't the Buddha before, and after he was the Buddha. And the Buddha said that my wisdom, my knowledge is unshakable, that I know the truth and it's unshakable. And so he was asked by many as he was traveling around India, the entire region, and teaching after his enlightenment. He was asked, what did you gain from that 6 years? What did you get from it? This would be a common question in the world. And he would answer, nothing. I got nothing from it. But I'll tell you what I lost. I lost anger, fear, hatred, greed, delusion. And this is the attainment of freedom. He lost everything that was not himself. And this is what yoga is about. The goal of yoga is to be yourself. Not to be identified with the role that you played. Not to be identified with the body or even with the thoughts, which are constantly changing. But to identify with your own true nature. And this is the path of fearlessness. It's the path of joy, not a separate joy. Not a separate joy. It's the path of union. Union with the highest, but not a separate highest. Union with the highest of all. Union with all. Really coming into the place where you do not ever again feel separate, alone, or incomplete. Where you're free of this disease of separation. This is the goal of yoga. There's said to be 3 great paths of yoga, and here we'll place Raja Yoga. And we will take some reading while we're together from Raja Yoga, a little introduction first. And we're using one particular translation, and there are many, many translations of Raja Yoga Sutras or Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I'll show you. This is by Sri Swami Satchidananda. Swami Satchidananda is a disciple of Swami Shivananda. And he was in the West for many, many years. Many of you have heard of him. Some of you have taken yoga teacher training in the integral yoga tradition, which Swami Satchidananda is responsible for stewarding, for bringing to the West. This particular translation is very current in language, and it really, for those of us with this Western psyche, and us Westerners are very jaded. Everything has to be proven to us beyond a doubt, of course. And so it's very well written, and the commentary is beautiful. So we'll take some of this. It said that there are 4 paths of yoga. And some would say 5. And the ancients actually say 3, and we'll talk about those for a moment. But the 4 typically, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Nyana Yoga, Raja Yoga. And sometimes Raja Yoga is split into Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga is actually broken out separately. Bhagavad Gita speaks of 3 yogas. Of Nyana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, or the yoga of selfless service, the yoga of knowledge, and the yoga of devotion. So our situation is this, as we relate to what we've just been discussing, and this state of suffering that we find ourselves in. And it seems so far away, happiness or the real life, the joyous life, it seems so far away because we suffer, everyone around us is suffering. And of course we have the ideas that what we're suffering from is from the experiences that we're having here. But the masters will tell us this isn't it. They will tell us that what we suffer from is taking ourselves to be this body and these thoughts. Just this. Instead of spirit. the divine, the absolute, or no self, as would be said in the Buddhist tradition. That the suffering is due to delusion, that it's due to desire, craving for things for ourself. This is said. And it's hard to relate. This is understood. It's hard to relate. And really we come to yoga because we've tried many, many other things. All of us have checked a number of boxes at this point. So imagine for a moment, and we can just take a moment here together, maybe close the eyes and just come within and take a moment just to sit with yourself. And I don't ask you to accept what's being shared as absolute truth, but I ask you to make room for it, to allow it, to just imbibe in it for a moment. Imagine, if you will, that what is shared with us from the Masters is true. So many different ways to say that you are child of God, that you are eternally free, that you are spirit, that you are Brahman, and other ways to say you are not the body, that you are not the thoughts. And if you imagine this for a moment, if you feel it, if you really allow this to permeate, that you are not this body, that nothing that happens to this body, nothing that happens in this world needs to cause suffering, because you're actually in the world but not of it. That the pain that comes to the body, it's temporary, it's temporal. But that you, as spirit, Brahman, truth, are really unaffected by it. And it's just an experience for a moment. Imagine for a moment, just accept it for this time. And see what happens to fear. In fact, see what happens to your thoughts. If you truly know that you are whole and complete, that you're not in need of something, that you're not alone, that all are one. What is craved at that point? Where is fear at that point? Where is anger? Maybe a little taste of what the Buddha was sharing will come. And we'll chant Om together 3 times and open the eyes gently. Om. And if this is so, the question arises, well, how the heck did I get in this situation? If it's true that I'm spirit and I'm not this body, why the heck do I take myself to be this body? Why am I suffering if I'm eternal? If it's really true that I'm eternal? In the Bhagavad Gita, and Lord willing, we'll have some discussion on Bhagavad Gita together as well, if you'd like to join it. In the Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, when Lord Krishna begins to teach wisdom, he says, the wise grieve neither for themselves nor for others. Grieving comes from sense of loss, that the wise don't feel loss. And why? He answers. He says, There's never been a time when you have not been, nor I, nor all of this. He's saying, you're eternal, you're eternal. So if it's true, then why am I having this suffering? Why am I experiencing this way? And the answer will be from the masters, because we're confused, deluded. We've taken ourselves to be this body. We are striving to find the happiness in the objects. That we're living a life which is turned around from the real life, juxtaposed. That feeling that we need to compete and grab and take what is ours and take it away from others, and that happiness is something that we can attain to by getting and getting and getting. But that in fact, happiness is known when one is free of these ideas. The human is said to be a mix of three qualities. And these are Icha, Jnana, and Kriya. Icha meaning will, Jnana, knowledge or thinking, and Kriya, action. Like this. And we can identify with this. Each of us feel in the heart a sense that we're missing something in order to complete us, that we're lacking something, that we need to have it in order to be complete. And each of us will have a different idea of what that is. But in this state, and it's called the state of avidya, in this state, we feel incomplete. We learn that it's false, that it's a false feeling, it's a false notion, that it's not true. And eventually, in the learning, the practice of yoga, the study of yoga, the rising up within yoga, we discover, and the feeling is actually relinquished. And this coming from perceived separation into the knowing that we're not separate is the path for each and every one of us. So we do rise up, we do evolve into it, and all of us here are evolving. But the experience that we're having is this feeling of longing for something that will complete us. And of course, longing for it, we think about how to have it. How can I get it? How can I make it mine? Or how can I avoid the things that will cause me not to have what it is that I need in order to be complete? And that what for each of us, it could be money, it could be a person, it could be power, it could be to get away from it all. It can be anything. In this infinite world, there are infinite possibilities of what it could be. But in each of us, that seed of discord is there, that seed of dissatisfaction is there, as if in the heart, longing coming from it, and then thought. If you look at your thoughts, you'll see that almost every thought, and we hear that in this human birth, we have something like, on average, 75,000 thoughts a day. Each of us, 75,000 thoughts. If you look at the thoughts, you'll see sometimes thought on top of thought on top of thought. Oh my God, like no end of thoughts. But there is an end of it. That's Raja Yoga. That's what Raja Yoga is teaching. The practices are about ending the thoughts, ending this suffering relationship with the thoughts. But it seems like no end. It seems like, if we actually look, and if you look at the thoughts, you'll see that the thoughts are related to the desire, either ragadvesha, either going towards what it is that you want or away from what it is that you don't want. Same thing. And then action, kriya, action. Walking towards, moving towards, grabbing what is yours, what you want, like this, or pushing what you don't want away. So longing, which is the seed of desire, thought, which is the working out of how to attain what is desired, and action, which is the acting in order to have it. So as we live in the state of delusion, our desires, our thoughts, and our actions are also coming from this state. As a result, we long for the temporal, not realizing that the temporal won't satisfy us. We long for $1 or a diamond or a person who's constantly changing, with the idea that they'll complete us. And of course it's false, it won't happen. And then the thoughts are all about getting that, and the actions are all about getting that. Yoga and what are called the 3 great paths of yoga are about turning that around. Instead of having desires and longings for myself to enter into a state which will be helpful to us of longing for the one, longing for the absolute. We can say longing for God, but so many ways to say. Longing for truth also can be said. Longing for freedom can also be said. To be free of these base desires, of these self-centered desires, of these self-centered actions which lead us to, it's said in the scriptures, death to death, death to death, death to death. Cycle, samsara, over and over and over again. And some of the scriptures will say that we've been here in order to come here 100 billion times before. 100 billion times before. Groundhog Day on steroids. Over and over and over. And now here we are as yoga practitioners having an interest in learning something about yoga, the real yoga, having an interest in freedom. And this time it helps us to motivate us to be free. My God, this world is crazy, isn't it? So wanting to be free. And freedom comes from turning it around. So longing for the absolute. And then the thoughts coming into a place of how to attain the absolute, or flowing in a devotional state towards the absolute as an offering to the absolute, and actions selfless. And so these 3 great yogas are then Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is the yoga of the path of emotion, this longing for the temporal, to longing for the eternal, and finally devoting to the eternal, devoting to the absolute. By any name, Krishna, Jesus, Bhagavan, any name, or the eternal, the absolute, or universe, or Shakti, any of these, but for the infinite, for the eternal, for that which is highest. So from longing for the temporal to longing for the eternal, and then devoting to the eternal. That's Bhakti Yoga. Nyana Yoga is study of scripture and self-study in order to turn the nature of thought around from I need, I want, to I live to serve. I study Swadhyaya, yes, I study the various shastras. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about the nature of truth. I'm learning how to rise up in the truth. I'm learning how to be selfless. I'm learning to know nothing. I'm learning to be free of limited knowledge. Again, coming back to the idea that shared, that we already have what we want. It's a matter of unlearning more than it is learning. But the learning process now is about unlearning. That's Nyana Yoga, unlearning, or letting go of all of the limited ideas, beliefs, etc. that we've been holding on to. And then Karma Yoga is, instead of grabbing, offering. Instead of grabbing, offering. That's Karma Yoga. Instead of taking from me, to serve you. And finally, to serve you, the highest in you, Namaskar, the divine in you. To serve you, the one in all. To see the one in all. To serve the one in all. This is Karma Yoga. And Raja Yoga, how does Raja Yoga suit? Raja Yoga is a science supporting all three of these great paths. Raja Yoga is called the mystical path, or the path of controlling the mind or uplifting the mind, or royal path also, Raja meaning royal. And in this case, meaning that you are the royal, you are the ruler, and you've abdicated for a time. You've handed the keys for the kingdom, which are really in your hand. You've handed them to the limited mind and said, here, you take me to happiness. And now you've decided that the mind can't do that on its own. And now you're taking the keys back. That's Raja Yoga. So with that little bit of discussion, let's take a little bit of reading and discuss. Now, I'm not a scholar. You've probably gathered, and if we've met before, you know that as well. I'm just a pilgrim. I just do my best to live in peace, to share. I'm a student. I'm always a student, and I live to serve. I live to serve the One. So from this perspective, we share. There are 4 books in Patanjali Yoga or Raja Yoga Sutras. They're called books or sections. And we study, typically in yoga, we study the first 2. We don't study so much the last 2. The first 2 are the book on theory and the book on practice. And whatever we've heard about Raja Yoga Sutras to this point, typically we'll find in those first 2 books. The last 2 books have more to do with the detail of states of samadhi and cities and like this. And for advanced study, it's possible that there can be an interest in these. But it can be said that in truly mastering the teachings in the first 2 books, that freedom awaits, that these are enough to bring us to the state of freedom, to moksha. So together, the next 15 minutes or so, we'll read some of the sutras and we'll discuss them, and then we'll come to a wrap up. And I do pray that you will take one of the translations of the Raja Yoga Sutras, whether it's this one or another. As a yogi, there are 2 shastras that you really must have. I pray. I pray. Raja Yoga Sutras or Patanjali Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. These 2 you must have. In yoga teacher training, almost all of the yoga teacher trainings will include at least a little bit of the theory from these 2 great shastras. And there are thousands of shastras, but these 2 are fundamental to this path of freedom. They're fundamental in terms of helping to relate our condition, helping to understand it conceptually, ourselves, helping to see how we've lost ourselves to this state of dis-ease, and coming to learn how the practices are adopted in order to bring us out of the state of suffering, how it all fits together. Yoga is a system both of theory or science and practice. Both are together as 2 wings of the bird. And really for a yogi to get something meaningful out of the practice of yoga, understanding of the theory, of the concepts, is an absolute requirement. If we want to go beyond just the physical pleasure of the asana practice, then please, we must. Okay, so we'll read a little. The first 2 sutras are famous. The first one is, and just English, now the exposition of yoga is being made. So now yoga is defined. It's often translated this way. And then in Sanskrit, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. This one we hear often in Sanskrit. Yoga's chitta, vritti, nirodha. And we can break it down. Yoga, the state of union, is chitta, the mind stuff, which in its natural state is undisturbed, just as the sea, without waves, without wind, and without moss or disturbances that have raised mud from the bottom and it's become suspended in the water. Without these, the natural state of water is purity and clarity. And this is the mind as well, natural state of mind. So chitta, mind stuff. Vritti, whirlpools. So the state where the mind is full of whirlpools, thoughts. Nirodha, ending it. So here the restraint of the modifications of the mind stuff is called yoga. Which one? Which thoughts are to be ended? Really, all of them. And we'll step through some more here, and what we see is some thoughts are relatively more beneficial than others. Some thoughts are relatively more corrosive and harmful than others. But ultimately, one is wanting to reside in one's own nature, which is free from thought. Now, what does that mean? If you sit in the Midwest, in Michigan, you'll see, here in Arizona, not too many clouds except in the fall and the spring. But if you sit outside and you watch the clouds passing by, it's beautiful. But your experience with the clouds is that the clouds are not you. When you're watching the clouds, you can enjoy watching them pass by, and the clouds passing by won't cause you to suffer. In the same way, the thoughts are not you. You are observing the thoughts, but you're taking them to be you. You're taking them to be yours. The masters will say, no, they're not. So this thoughtless state is not actually being thoughtless, but it's being free of the mind, free of the idea that this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, that's mine, this wants to be mine, that's yours, being free of this, being free of mindness. So thoughts are universal. There is universal mind, but the disturbance is not the thought itself. The disturbance is coming from the state where you take the thought to be a command to action. So this is the disturbance. It's as if we've walked into a movie theater and we've sat down and the movie turns on, and as soon as the movie comes on, we immediately feel ourselves to be on the screen as one of the characters on the screen. And as soon as this happens, we're subject to all of the conditions that the character is, such as birth, death, all of this. The stilling of the mind is this. It is the stilling of the mind, or the end of the mind, or the end of the ego. And then, the third sutra, and then what happens? So in this state of yoga, if I've achieved it, what happens? Then the self, capital S self, then you abide in your own true nature. It's not death. Mind might say, ooh, that sounds like death to me. It's really life. And if you look, you'll see it. Oh my gosh. What have been your peak experiences? If you consider now, if you reflect on a happy time, a joyous experience, a joyous time, experiencing happiness. If you reflect on it and you come up with a time, now look at the state of mind. You can close your eyes and reflect and consider. Look at the state of mind from that. See if you can look and see. And what you'll see invariably is the mind was quiet, or it was in a state of gratitude. That is dhyana or dharana. That is meditation or contemplation. Really, that is samadhi. For a moment, that is samadhi. When the mind is absorbed and you're able to experience your own self, sit in yourself, sit or abide in your own true nature. And this is what yoga is teaching and is enabling, is to come from where we've had the experience on occasion, but now to understand it, to comprehend it, to understand our own true nature, to live in a way where we're able to stay in this place and be in the flow, to be able to serve without being disturbed, to live in the dharmic way, which is the natural way. So then the seer or self abides in its own true nature. And if you reflect, you'll see there's nothing more important than this. At other times, fourth sutra, the self appears to assume the form of mental modifications. And these are the two states that we abide in. Either we abide in our own true nature and we have the experience of joy or peace or love, or we take the thoughts to be who we are and we abide in Boga or dis-ease or disturbance. At other times, the self appears to assume the forms of the mental modifications, the thoughts. So there's either in a moment a thought that I'm taking to be me or mine, or there is peace in a moment. And the life is a series of moments strung together. What's said to be the real life is the state of yoga, chitta vritti nirodha, where the mind stuff has become undisturbed, no longer carrying us hither and thither, but allowing us to be who we are and to be in the world while not forgetting that we're not of, that we are not of the world. So continues to describe the types of thoughts. There are 5. They are right knowledge, misconception, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. These are the 5. And if you look, you'll see that all of our thoughts fit into one of these categories. And all of these are explained. Right knowledge, misconception, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. And to study, to understand, so helpful. And then in the following sutras, these are described. Sources of right knowledge. Misconception. Misconception occurs when knowledge of something is not based upon its true form. And perhaps we look and see that most of our knowledge about objects is actually misconception. Verbal delusion, an image that arises on hearing mere words without any reality as its basis, is verbal delusion. An example, you hear the word Mary, and see if an idea of Mary or an image of Mary, a Mary, arises. And of course the image is not actually related to the word, it's related to your own prior experience, the conditioning. So verbal delusion. And then sleep and memory are described. And it's said that these thoughts, these types of thoughts, either cause us to suffer, that's one direction, and verbal delusion and misconception would be said to be of this nature, or they lead us towards freedom on the other side. And this would be right knowledge, for example, which leads us to freedom. A little more here. So we'll skip forward to Sutra 30. We're still in the portion on contemplation or theory. Disease, dullness. Then the question can be, so again, why don't I know myself? What is it that's causing me to suffer? What is it that's causing me to keep forgetting myself? Distractions of the mind. Kleshas are explored more in section 2 as well. Kleshas, the disturbances or the distractions. And here, distractions such as disease, dullness, doubt, carelessness, laziness, sensuality, false perception, failure to reach firm ground, and slipping from the ground gained. These distractions of the mind stuff are the obstacles. And continues and discusses how to come out of this state. I read a few. Perhaps you've heard this one before, and this is one of the famous sutras, not as famous as yoga is the cessation of the vrittis or the whirlpools in the mind stuff. But here, you can close your eyes perhaps and listen to this. So how to be free of this delusion, how to be free of this suffering, what thoughts to cultivate in the mind, what attitudes to cultivate in the mind that will lead us towards freedom, that will lead us towards yoga, that will allow us to experience the light of our own being and to be a light unto others in this world, to not just experience the happiness which is our own true nature, but also to actually be an instrument to help others to know where is the happiness that they've been seeking as well. So here it's described, what can we cultivate? By cultivating attitudes of friendliness towards the happy, compassion for the unhappy, delight in the virtuous, and disregard towards the wicked, the mind stuff retains its undisturbed calmness. There are some sutras here which really contain the entirety of the teaching. And this is one. If we study this over and over and find the way to live it, then the inner disturbances of mind will fall away. This is what is said. The mind stuff retains its undisturbed calmness or peace of mind comes. And where there is peace of mind, as the yogis say, then there is happiness. This awareness of the inner state. And finally, one more sutra I'd just like to share from Sadhanapada, the portion on practice. And here in the second book, the portion on practice, we get yamas and niyamas. This sutra, not as famous, but very important. Accepting pain as help for purification, study of spiritual books, and surrender to the Supreme Being constitute yoga and practice. So in the first sutra of the second book, the book on practice itself is defined. Here's our situation. So we've discussed this. We suffer, but we don't want to suffer. We don't need to suffer more than is absolutely necessary to be free. So there's suffering and there's needless suffering, as it were. I look back on the suffering that I've experienced in this life, and it I'm sure it will sound odd, but I'm so grateful for it because I've learned from it. I've been able to learn so much. Everything here is a teacher for us. And there are no accidents here. From this perspective, I'll share. And there's only love here. And of course it won't seem like that. I understand. I never thought so either. But when this is said, what's being shared is that if you know who you are, you're free. You're not this body. And the experiences that we've had, They're teaching us what it is that we must let go of. It's said that there are two paths in this life. There's the path of the pleasant and the path of the good. And the path of the pleasant is the pursuit of pleasures. And it's said that, and the avoidance of pain, and it is said that this path is completely unsatisfying, that it is pursuing that which is sweet in the beginning, but like poison in the end. That it's like eating something sweet and then finding out that we've ingested poison instead. That living this life in the self-centered way, pursuing pleasures, pleasurable experiences, and avoiding painful experiences, that like it or not, we have a moment of pleasure, but then so much pain that comes from it. And what's being shared is that always, in living in this way, pain will come, suffering will come, always. And that there is another way, and the other way is the pursuit of the good, that which is beneficial for ourselves and for all. And this is said to be painful in the beginning, like poison in the beginning, but resulting in the nectar of life, of the real life, of freedom. And this is being discussed here as well. Accepting pain as help for purification. This doesn't mean to go out and experience pain for pain's sake. My God, no, please don't do that. It's not saying that at all. It's not saying that you're doomed to suffer, not at all. It is saying it will be hard to do what's good and proper because our habitual nature, we've come from this place where we didn't know. And now we're wanting to know. But to know requires letting go of bad habits. And letting go of bad habits requires fortitude, strength, courage, stamina, patience. And all of these are hard, and therefore they're painful to adopt. And accepting the pain of this as help for purification, purifying the mind, purifying the body, is the practice of yoga, along with study of spiritual books, swadhyaya, and study of self, and surrender to the Supreme Being. Ishvara Pranadhana, which is one of the niyamas, one of the great niyamas. Ishvara Pranidhana. So these three together constitute the practice of yoga. Hatha yoga, of course, the asanas is a part. It's a part, but really the whole of yoga is much more. So this ends our time together now. I pray that this will be of benefit in some way. And I pray that you are encouraged to study and to practice. And that you continue forward and that you have your goal clearly set within and that you don't give up on it. That you achieve success in everything that you do. And finally, that you achieve success in attaining to your own freedom. Let's close with a prayer. Bless you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. And we'll chant. This is a Mahamrityunjaya mantra. If anyone knows, please join in chanting. And we chant for the benefit of all, for healing, for all, and for freedom for all. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mrityor Mokshya Mamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mrityor Mokshya Mamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mrityor Mokshya Mamritat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bolo Satkar Shivananda Maharaj Ki Jai. Om Bolo Sri Swami Vishnu Devananda Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai for all the masters of all the traditions. Jai for the yogis that have joined. God bless you. Safety, security, and freedom. Peace. Om Shanti.